The Great Depression is one of the most devastating economic disasters in human history. The fallout from this crisis was felt worldwide, and it took years for the global economy to recover. Hello, and welcome to our channel. Today we're going to tell you about the history of the Great Depression. So let us begin. It's safe to say that the Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in history. It all started in the USA in 1929, and within a decade, it had swept across the entire globe. In practically every country, the Depression led to an enormous drop in economic output and a gain in unemployment rates. It was the worst crisis in the United States since the Civil War. Capitalism faced one of the biggest blows in history during the Great Depression. The magnitude of the blow was based on the fact that it went against the commonly held ideas about the boundless potential for economic growth. In his first presidential address, United States President Franklin Delano Roosevelt attempted to evaluate the massive damage, saying, "The withered leaves of industrial enterprise lie on every side. Farmers find no markets for their produce. The savings of many years and thousands of families are gone. More important, a host of unemployed citizens face the grim problem of existence, and an equally great number toil with little return." However, even his attempt at an explanation was inapt. The scale and effects of this economic disaster were unfathomable. Both the onset and the duration of the Great Depression were dependent on a larger context. As a whole, the United States and Europe were hit harder and for longer by the Great Depression than Japan and much of Latin America. Foreseeably, a wide range of factors contributed to the greatest global economic depression ever. The gold standard, which linked nearly all countries in a network of fixed currency exchange rates, played a crucial role in carrying the American downturn to the rest of the world, causing the economic output to fall in those countries as well. This was due to a combination of declining consumer demand, financial panics, and misguided government policies. The end of the gold standard and the resulting monetary expansion helped the economy recover from the Great Depression. The Great Depression had far-reaching repercussions, both in terms of the suffering it caused and the way it reshaped economic policy. It is said that the decreased spending by people was a primary factor in the onset of the Great Depression in the United States. This, in turn, caused a drop in production as businesses realized their stockpiles had grown and there was no one to buy them. Over the duration of the Great Depression, there were many factors that contributed to a reduction in expenditure in the United States. The 1920s were a wealthy decade for America. There was a dramatic increase in the value of stock as the stock market grew. Millions of ordinary Americans raced to buy stocks in the hopes of turning a profit. A lot of people got high-risk loans and even mortgages to put their money into the stock market. The sudden surge in trading activity drove stock values far above their intrinsic value. By the end of 1929, the decline in stock values officially began. Even as October progressed, investors were understandably concerned about the state of their portfolios due to the ongoing depreciation. An equally frantic rush to sell equities followed the initial frenzy of buying them. Panicked investors dumped a record 13 million shares of stock on October 24, 1929, marking the beginning of the stock market crash. Since then, Thursday the 29th has been known as Black Thursday. However, Black Tuesday, October 29th, caused much more harm. More than 16 million shares were traded that day. Most stocks experienced a precipitous decline in value. Stocks had lost around 80% of their value by the end of 1932. Before and during the Great Depression, financial panics occurred, but none had such a profound and lasting impact as the stock market collapse in the Great Depression. Since the stock market crisis, consumers have reduced their consumption of goods and services. Those who had experienced financial losses, as well as those who were concerned about the economy's future, delayed spending and opted to save instead. A series of bank collapses added to the economic turmoil. A large number of people rushed into the banks at once to withdraw their funds, and the institutions were unable to meet the demand. Lenders felt the pinch when borrowers defaulted on their payments. As much as 20% of American banks had closed their doors by 1933. Having lost faith in financial institutions, consumers were more prone to hoard their remaining savings. Less money being spent meant fewer purchases were made. This decline in demand led to the closure of many factories across the country. During the depths of the Great Depression, American manufacturing produced slightly more than half of what they did in 1929. As more and more companies went under, the unemployment rate shot up to 25%. Those who were fortunate enough to maintain their employment were paid roughly 50% less than they had been before. It had been a long time since the agriculture sector of the economy had been doing well. During a period of sustenance pricing for farm products, many American farmers were laboring under the weight of substantial debt. As if things weren't bad enough already, the Great Depression hit. Dust Bowl conditions were made worse by a prolonged drought in the Great Plains. About 2.5 million people fled the Plains states because of the destruction, with many of them heading to California. Sunshine and a better life were waiting for them in the West. However, in reality, the uprooted families had a hard time finding low-paying work as migrant farm laborers. The global economic crisis originated in the United States. After World War I, the industrialized countries of Europe relied significantly on loans from the U.S. to finance their recovery. International trade also connected the U.S. to Europe and the world beyond. As a result of its rise to economic preeminence, the United States had come to be the primary market for a wide variety of foreign commodities. A number of countries' economies collapsed as a direct result of U.S. efforts to reduce international loans and commerce. Countries that were already struggling increased their taxes on imports as a means of protecting their domestic industry. Because of this, trade fell even worse than it already had. The Depression had a disproportionate impact on Germany and Britain. Stocks crashed, exports slowed, and company closures increased in Germany. In times of percentage decline, German industrial production was almost on par with that of the United States. By the beginning of the spring of 1931, the unemployment rate in Britain had reached the 25% mark. At about a third of the rate of the United States, Britain's industrial output fell significantly. While the economic data from the Great Depression is startling, it's not enough to fully convey the immense suffering faced by the majority of Americans at the time. Nearly every person out of work had a family that was counting on them for support. Such widespread hopelessness and hunger were unknown in the United States before then. For 5 cents, once wealthy people tried to sell apples on street corners. All around the country, hundreds of sad shanty towns popped up to house the homeless. Named after the Republican president who presided over the calamity, Herbert Hoover, these settlements became known as Hoovervilles. Hoover blankets, made of old newspapers, were used by those who slept outdoors. In every major city, starving citizens lined up for loaves of bread. More than 20,000 people in the United States committed suicide that year. America during the Great Depression was a shopper's paradise if you had a few dimes to spend. Less than $3,000 would get you into a brand new house. A nickel could buy you a loaf of bread. A pound of steak would hardly cost you 30 cents, and a gallon could be bought for 10 cents. Attending a movie, purchasing a nickel bag of popcorn, and entering the theater's prize giveaways all cost a total of just a dime. If you only had a cent, you would be unable to afford it. After covering essentials like rent and groceries, even the fortunate few often found themselves short on discretionary funds. It was a waste of time to contact the government during the Hoover era. There was no safety net of welfare programs funded by the government to prevent the working class from sliding into poverty. Governments at all levels in the United States felt the severe financial strain as tax receipts dropped during the Great Depression. There was not much that state governments could do to help people. At least, in the beginning, the federal government's response was inadequate. A prosperous future was quote-unquote just around the bends, in the words of President Hoover and his advisors. The government took various measures to counteract the economic decline. Business owners were warned by Hoover to avoid layoffs and pay freezes. He pleaded with legislators to fund infrastructure initiatives that would ultimately result in new employment opportunities. But he scoffed at the notion of helping people in need by personally delivering aid. According to him, that was the job of municipal governments and nonprofit organizations. Despite Hoover's best efforts, the economy continued to collapse. Anger among voters in 1932 led to Hoover's defeat, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt became the new president of the United States. Rapid action was taken by the incoming president. Roosevelt called for a nationwide bank holiday shortly after taking office in March 1933. Each and every bank was closed until government auditors deemed them to be in good standing. The financial crisis was ultimately resolved thanks to the bank holiday. Roosevelt also enacted the New Deal, a comprehensive plan to improve the economy. It included immediate action to stabilize the economy and create jobs. The bill also established brand new agencies with the mandate to control the economy. The objective was to guarantee that a catastrophe of this scale would never happen again. By the time the New Deal was over, the economy had started to improve. Production increased sharply in the middle of the 1930s, and millions of people found work through government initiatives. Unfortunately, the rate of unemployment remained high, and the United States saw yet another severe economic crisis in 1937 to 1938. Even after the United States entered World War II in 1941, the economy still experienced a crisis that was not resolved until the following year. Finally, the economy began to recover fully as a result of war-related production. The rate of recovery in other regions was quite variable. In late 1931 and early 1932, the economy of several Latin American countries showed signs of improvement. By late 1932, economic growth had resumed in Britain, Germany, and Japan. At the same time as the United States began to recover in the early months of 1933, so did Canada and many smaller European countries. However, the French economy did not begin to improve significantly until 1938. European political extremism was bolstered by the Great Depression. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power in Germany in 1933 as a result of the populace's anger at the country's faltering economy. The Great Depression in Germany was finally overcome thanks to Nazi public works projects and military spending. American literature and the arts were profoundly impacted by the Great Depression. To alleviate the suffering of the impoverished, novelists, playwrights, photographers, and musicians focused their efforts. Jobs for artists, authors, and performers were established by the New Deal's Federal Art Project, Federal Writers Project, and Federal Theater Project. Artists of the time often felt obligated to inform their audiences about important societal concerns through their work. Luckily, we haven't seen such a crisis since then. So that is all the time we had today, folks. Hope you enjoyed this video. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and to hit the bell icon on your way out. See you all next time. Adios.